Крыша, я первый, вас понял. 8100, 8350, 8400, 8550.
Vector 360, flight level 230, call pre-brief. Scramble.
Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are going to be taking a look at the DC Designs Phantom. More specifically, we are going to be taking a look at the FGR2 included with the package. The add-on also ships with the F4E and the F4J. Today's video is going to be more of a review flight really, as opposed to a full review of the product. In the video today we're going to be somewhat simulating a QRA or quick reaction alert flight. As you'll have seen from the introduction, we have a Russian TU95 Bear approaching UK airspace. So we're currently on the ground at RAF Honington. We're going to be making a two-ship flight out towards the TU95, the Intercept. We'll turn him back out over the North Sea. Once we're done with that, we'll return to base. We'll carry out a few manoeuvres overhead the field, just to get more of a feel for the aircraft flight model. And then, as usual, I'll give you a more detailed breakdown on the product at the end of the video. We'll discuss a little bit more as well exactly what is included with the product, as again with the rather specific nature of the flight here today, we're not going to cover everything during the flight itself. It's probably worth noting as well that whilst we are going to be loosely simulating a QRA flight, we're not going to rush our way through the startup and the various procedures en route. As usual, the aim of the flight is to give you a good feel for the product, so we'll run through everything at a reasonable pace, we'll run through all of the various checklists provided with the aircraft. But nevertheless, hopefully the scenario proves to be interesting, entertaining. I do hope you enjoy the flight, and as always if you do, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel. Okay, so here we are then in the cockpit of the DC Designs FGR.2 Phantom. Again, we're on the flight line currently at RAF Honington. We've got our wingman just off on the left. And as discussed, although we're going to be carrying out a QRA flight here today, we're going to take our time with the startup process. We'll run through the full checklist, just to give us an idea for the feel in terms of depth of aircraft systems and fidelity. Just before we do that, a quick glance then around the cockpit. I would say very much up to the typical standards of DC Designs. That is to say that the aircraft looks broadly accurate overall. You'd certainly know that you're in a Phantom cockpit, but there are certainly lots of inaccuracies when it comes to the systems modelling. And as well with the texturing, once again, nothing to write home about there. The texturing is adequate. I would say it's a little bit neater than some of DC Designs' previous products, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more depth and accuracy to the textures overall. Anyway, with that in mind, running through the start checks, the canopy is confirmed open, landing gear lever is selected down, the park brake is set, the generator 1 and 2 switches can both go on, pedestal lighting is set as required, DC master selector can go through to ready, CADC is set through to normal. We'll be starting the number 1 engine first, so the ignition switch can go on. Engine master. A little bit tricky to get the click spots for the left-hand engines. There is the option to remove the throttles. Not really sure that was necessary. You can actually see the switches, so in theory you should be able to have separate click spots there. You can also, of course, just move the throttles up. Anyway, engine 1 master can go on. And we'll hit the engine 1 starter. You can hear the igniters lighting off there already with the ignition selected. And you can hear the engine spooling up. Nice start sounds from the aircraft overall. And we'll just briefly head outside for a moment so that we can hear that Spey engine roar into life. And then we'll come back for the number 2 start. Okay, so we have a good start there on the number 1. We'll do the same for the number 2. So number 2 ignition can go on. Same there for the number 2 engine master. And finally we'll hit the number 2 starter. And monitoring the gauges here as the engine runs up. You can see we do have rotation now on N1. And just coming up through 10%. The engine should stabilise above 50% N1. We do have fuel flow. And there goes our TGT, so good light off there of the engine. And again, pretty nice start-up sounds from the aircraft overall. I'll just stay quiet now so that you can hear the rest of the sequence. And a good start there from the number 2, stabilised around 65%. We do have starter cutouts, and we'll get rid of the engine 2 ignition. So 2 good starts, the radar mode selector, an area of the aircraft which seems a little bit lacklustre currently. We do have a working radar, which is nice to see, but the mode selector doesn't seem to have any markings. I don't know whether or not it's true to life of the aircraft, but there's no particular guidance in the manual either. So we'll just leave the radar as is for now. Gunsight reticle can go through to air. We'll set up the rest of the weapons panel in the climb out towards the targets. The lighting, we'll take the nav lights on, strobe lights on, and the taxi lights on for now. Engine temperatures and pressures are checked. For the inertial nav, we'll take a look at that later on in the video. And for the stability augmentation, we'll take on the yaw, roll, and pitch channels. Interestingly, that's not actually mentioned in the checklist, so there are a few items missing as well from the checklist, as best I can tell. For the taxi checks, we'll close up the canopy. And the canopy is closed and locked, same there for our number 2. Taxi clearance has been obtained, noticeable steering is set. Park brake can come off. And we'll make our way out towards runway 09.
Tower Leader 5 in Atlantic approaching Foxtrot North. Can Leader 5 cross Foxtrot North, north to south after departing? Leader 5 after the departing twin, cross north to south, report vacated. Leader 5, thank you. India 0108, line up and wait on runway 27. 0108, thank you. All correct, switch to ground, 119.15 for taxi, bye-bye.
Okay, so we now have ourselves lined up here on runway 09, just running through the last of our takeoff items. The landing lights have been selected on, strobe lights same as well, taxi lights selected off. For the AOA index light, that's set to fully bright. Earlier extension not required, the wings are unfolded and locked. The flaps can come through to takeoff. And we do have the slats and flap indication lights. Com and nav frequencies are set. The pitch trim, according to the checklist, we want 5% nose up. A little bit tricky to set that since there's no scale there on the gauge. We're looking to rotate at 160 knots. We'll take the park brake off. We'll just hold the aircraft on the brakes here. Initially we'll come through to full military power. And off the brakes. Into the afterburners, you can hear those lighting off. Our wingman rolling there as well. So it's keeping the aircraft tracking straight. Overall the rudder response on the F4 actually feels pretty good. Holding station there with the wingman. There's 160, so easing back on the stick. We're looking to get the nose up to 10 degrees. And there is 10 degrees. We do have positive rate of climb, we'll bring the gear. And we'll just maintain low level here until we've built up a little bit more speed. Flaps can come up. And climbing away. Intercept heading is 045, so we'll start a left turn now. Onto our heading, we'll slew the heading bug around as well. And there's 045. This is a little bit tricky to accurately fly the heading. Once again, there's no index or lub line there on the heading indicator. Anyway, coming on to our heading. Speed up at Mach 0.9. We'll pitch to maintain the speed for now, just till we're up to this cloud base. Our wingman now planted firmly there off the right wing. So pitching up to around 30 degrees now. Up through 9,000 feet. Up nearly 40 degrees nose up, maintaining 0.9 on the Mach number. Once again, this is a QRA flight, so the aim of the game here is to get out towards the target as quickly as we can. We're not going to worry about shattering any windows down there on the ground. Into the cloud, a little bit of icing there as you come through the first cloud layer. It's not in the checklist, but we'll take the pitot heat on. Still visual with the wingman for the time being. And speed falling off quite dramatically there as we come up through the cloud layer, down to around Mach 0.7, so we'll pitch down again, build up that speed. Just coming up through 30,000 feet. Target altitude is 36,000, so we'll get the nose down. Reduce that rate of vertical speed. And level ourselves off at 36,000. Leaving the afterburners in for now, again letting that speed build up. And overall it's a pretty epic sight there with the FGR2 just off the right wing. I really love making use of flight control replay. It just makes the whole experience with fast jets in the sim feel that little bit more immersive. Anyway, we can start fencing in. We'll leave the weapons for now, but for the lights, we'll take the landing lights off. Same there for the strobes and the nav lights. Up through 35,000 feet, so another 1,000 foot to go here in the climb. Building that speed up towards Mach 0.8. And in terms of our fuel flow now, down to around 11,000 pounds now on each engine. Up at altitude. Just approaching 360, leaving those afterburners in. Then that speed build up. Once we're leveled off, we'll get in the AFCS, or essentially the autopilot. And just losing a little bit of altitude there as we level off at 360. The aircraft can get a little bit twitchy in pitch, I find. You see they're just making minor corrections. We tend to oscillate around the pitch axis a little bit. So it's 360. For the AFCS, we'll engage that, set the coupler. We'll come into out hold. The autopilot capture can be a little bit aggressive as well. We're currently in heading hold with the heading bug set. It is worth noting there as well, you can see that the mode selector doesn't quite line up there with the heading reference. So again, just minor details here and there that aren't quite as polished as I would ordinarily like to see. And you can see there as well without holds, the aircraft taking a little bit of time there to capture. Anyway, leveled off for now, speed building up through Mach 1.2. We'll keep the afterburners in for now, maintain the speed as we head out over the UK coastline, tracking inbound towards the TU95.
Report 340, your level with Angels 28, target 015 with Angels 30.
Roger, nothing on radar yet. Now level with Angels.
Your target is 180, 30,000.
Okay, so we are now moving into position against the TU95. You can see him there off to our 1 o'clock. Look at our wing there off on the 3 o'clock position. We're going to move in off his left-hand wing. Give him a call on 121.5, have him clear the airspace here out over the North Sea, have him turn out towards the east. As we close in, we'll make our weapon selections just in case. So for the missile status, we'll go through to the left-hand forward station. That's our Sparrow radar-guided missile. And you can see they were showing selected and ready. For the weapon selector panel, master power switch can go on. For the master arm, we'll leave that in safe for the time being. And for the missile control, we'll leave that in radar. I'm not all that familiar with the F4 and its systems. Obviously as well, the weapon systems are modelled in fairly light depth, with Microsoft Flight Simulator being a civilian sim, so I don't know whether or not we need to go through to centre on station select. We'll do that all the same. So just approaching the TU95. As I say, we'll come in off his left wing.
Alpha 06 Midland, turn right now, make your heading 150.
Alpha 06, roger. I think I got in contact at head right, level. I'm looking level on radar, nothing yet. Alright, 150.
We've got 540 ground speed, you can put that up a bit. I've got barrow IN. Okay, I've got low loft selected. Ready for symbology? Target symbology's in. Target slightly left. Okay, stand by. Radar's on. Correcting slightly left as well. Okay, I've got it. It's a good mark. Height speed.
Okay, so the TU95 now at our 11 o'clock position. And once again, we'll try hailing him, have him turn out towards the east. Clear of the UK airspace. So just maintaining station here off the right wing for the time being. Keep a little bit of distance between him and ourselves. Those speeds looking good, holding station quite nicely there. Now Mach 0.72. And looks like he has just commenced his turn now out towards the east. We'll just stay with him a little bit longer. Make sure he does come onto that easterly heading, just coming through 150 currently. Obviously he's making quite a steady turn here onto a reciprocal track away from the UK coastline. Our wingman now just falling into a 4 o'clock position. And overall the F4 or the FGR2, fairly pleasant at low speed actually in terms of handling. It is down to a point though. I believe if you get the aircraft too slow it will definitely bite you. I believe the famous saying on the Phantom is speed is life. And we really are back at quite a low speed here for the FGR2. You can see, looking at our wingman there, we've got a fairly high angle of attack currently to maintain station with the T95. Okay, so he's just cleared now out onto a easterly heading, tracking away from the UK airspace. I think we can call it job done there ourselves, so onto the afterburners once again. We'll break off, back out towards the west, and we'll head back home towards Honington.
Correction the IP, you got 560 knots, smash around about 4 early, which is okay. Okay. Clock's away, 55 seconds. Looking package looks good, correction coming in short. I'm correcting slightly right. There you go, that's the right hand correction. Got it. 45 seconds, 7 knots.
Okay, so we're just approaching the UK coastline once again, just tucked in here behind our number 2. Inbound again towards Honington, we've got about 36 miles to run there currently. Doing around 550 knots, about 9 miles a minute. It's about 4 minutes to run inbound towards the base. Just coming over the coast, we've got Lowestoft and Great Yarmouth there. Off the right wing, Norwich somewhere out at our 2 o'clock. So the plan here, we're going to head back in towards Honington. In terms of our fuel state, we've still got about £9,000 of fuel on board the aircraft, so quite a bit to play with here. And obviously we haven't really put the F4 through its paces just yet. So we're going to make a supersonic low-level pass down runway 27 at Honington. We'll head outside for that just to see the Phantom in a supersonic flyby. That's got to be well worth it. And then we'll break away, our wingman can come back in for his landing. And we'll do some aerial work overhead the field. We'll put the flight model through its paces just a little bit more. We haven't had a real chance yet to test out the Phantom's flight modelling. In terms of our weapons then, everything's safe again. And in terms of our lights, we've got the landing lights on, same there for the strobes and the nav lights, just for a little bit of visibility as we make our way back towards the base. We've currently got Honington dialed in on the INS. We've got INS selected there on the mode selector for the HSI. Interestingly, we can't actually currently set the course. That may be user error, but to be fair, there's no relevant course showing there either. We're showing 359 inbound towards Honington, which is incorrect currently. I have tried playing around with the INS a little bit. It's a bit difficult to know really, since once again the manual's fairly light on detail when it comes to the aircraft systems. Anyway, 22 miles to run now. It's about another 2 minutes. Sitting nicely here in behind the other FGR2. Probably a little bit close to comfort in reality, but again it's going to make for a nice cinematic flyby here as we come down runway 27. Shortly going to be approaching the town of Dis. That should be just off the right wing. And we should have a disused airfield as well, just off the nose. It's a little bit tricky to see currently. So, am I enjoying the F4 overall? So far I have to say that I am. The aircraft is once again very much done to a typical DC design standard, which I know isn't everybody's cup of tea. The aircraft could be better, of course, particularly visually. But I generally enjoy the flight models. They make some aircraft that I really like personally as well, the Harrier and now the Phantom. There's the disused airfield just coming off our 11 o'clock. And there's Dis just passing off the right wing. So once again, the aircraft of course could be visually done to a higher standard. For me though, it's really the details that just seem unfinished that tend to bother me. Again, for example, with the radar mode selector, no annotation there in terms of what we've actually selected on the radar. As I say, some of the switches not lining up. No index there for the heading on the HSI. So it's those sorts of things that really need polishing up. And I see that DC Designs have said they're going to stop putting out new products for a little while now and focus on what they already have, which I really hope they do. I think most of their aircraft do need that at this point. But again, overall I quite like the Phantom. It is a personal favourite, as I mentioned, so that does have some sway on my review, I must admit. But nevertheless, I think externally the aircraft looks pretty good in terms of both texturing and modelling. Internally a little bit less so, but again, you're not expecting a study level product from DC Designs. And the accuracy does tend to be fairly mid-level in terms of the modelling. As I mentioned before, you get a feel for the aircraft, if not a completely accurate simulation and model of the aircraft. Anyway, this Honington's runway 27, onto the afterburners again, we'll pick up the speed. Again, we're going to make a supersonic low-level pass down runway 27. We'll be coming back in on runway 09 later on. And just come up through Mach 1. Sure, in reality we'd be getting all sorts of buffeting here off the other FGR2. Down the runway. And we'll break off. Once again, our wingman can make a left-hand brake back in for his landing. And we'll just turn the speed here into altitude to carry out our aerial work. Okay, so we are going to have to negotiate the cloud layer a little bit here as we carry out our manoeuvres. There is a bit of icing around as well, so we'll just be cognizant of that. In terms of our speed, just coming back on 400 knots. It is pretty tricky to read the indicated airspeed there on the gauge. We've still got full afterburner, down to around £9,000 now on board the jet, so plenty of fuel to play with here. Again, just to test out the flight model a little bit further. So, Honington just down below us, first things first. Just come fully back on the stick. Rate of turn there seems pretty reasonable at high speeds, up at around Mach 1.1. And coming back off the thrust lever, so again high speed currently, both full deflection out to the right. Reasonably high roll rate there given the aircraft's speed currently. And again just picking up a little bit of icing. Then once more, fully back on the stick. That rate of turn seems pretty good actually, given our speed at the moment. Back into full afterburner. Really powering the aircraft around the turn. Which from what I've read is really how the Phantom was flown. It was all about power, all about energy, which makes sense for an interceptor. We'll let that speed start to reduce. As I was saying, inbound towards Honington though, overall I quite like the flight models of the various DC Designs aircraft. I don't think it'd be fair to call them study level, but DC Designs state they do their best to make the aircraft as accurate and true to life of their real world counterparts. I've heard comments both for and against that in terms of the accuracy. Obviously I can't really state myself whether or not the aircraft is accurate. But for example with the Harrier, I've heard from a real world Harrier pilot that there are many differences between the DC Designs Harrier and the real aircraft. But equally I found there was quite a lot to be had in common between the DCS version and the DC Designs version in terms of how you fly the aircraft, even if the flight model was different in certain phases. So speed back down to around 350 knots now. Again, fully back on the stick. Initially quite a high rate of turn, but that obviously reducing as we lose the energy. Back down to around 200 knots. You can hear there what I presume is an angle of attack or stall warning. We'll power out of that, so full afterburner once again. The Phantom really doesn't like to be slow apparently, so we'll see how it handles. Right down at around 200 knots. We'll just gain some altitude here before we do that, so up at around 5,000 feet. There's 200. Do a bit of a wing over. And you can see as we lose the speed there, back to around 100 knots now. The aircraft not interested at all, that's full deflection in terms of left aileron. So the controls feel very wallowy, very mushy. Really not getting much response out of the jet, which again you'd expect. The aircraft not really biting us though, so that's interesting. I thought we would have seen some quite aggressive behaviour out of the aircraft at low speed. £8,000 now on the fuel. We'll call 4,000 bingo fuel if we don't choose to land beforehand. Just build up some speed once again, so up at around 500 knots. Coming down runway 09. And back on the stick, we'll go for a loop. So once again, fully back there. You can see as well we do get some nice vapour effects as we pull the G. And just having to ease off the top of the loop there, once again to avoid blacking out. Again, there are some oscillations in pitch. You'd expect that with the more aggressive manoeuvring perhaps, but even with small pitch inputs I found the aircraft will oscillate a little bit. Anyway, I think that pretty much takes care of looking at the flight model in the more extreme sense. Let's try a couple more manoeuvres. Again though, the aircraft is good fun to fly. I'm enjoying chucking the Phantom around here. And the aircraft feels very manual, very hands-on, as you'd expect from a jet of this vintage. So 300 knots. Just come back on the stick again, bleed off the rest of that speed. We can take the gear and the flaps below 250. Take the speed brake here as well. And we'll come back in now for a landing onto runway 09. The deceleration rate as well with the speed brake feels pretty reasonable. There's 250 on the speed, we'll take the gear down. And 3 greens, the gear there pretty quick in terms of the lights, the same is true for the flaps and the slats. And we do have a wheels indication there as well. We'll take the flaps through to the takeoff position. We'll hold around 200 knots for now. Give ourselves a nice long wide downwind here, just to help me get a feel for the jet here as we make the landing. Off angle of attack currently as we're expecting. We're on about 160 knots. Down final approach. Around 140 as we come over the threshold. We're still fairly heavy here with our payload. So we'll start turning back in towards the field. Good there on the speed, just coming onto angle of attack. As we come around the corner, we'll go through to landing flap. So we have 3 greens on the gear, flaps set for landing. And no need, of course, for the hook today. It's onto our base leg. Again, looking good there in terms of the AOA. So 160 knots looking pretty good there in terms of the speeds. And happy with where we are in terms of the vertical profile. Quick look out to the right. All clear. The aircraft feels good in the approach configuration. Pretty easy to trim out as well. And the manual suggests that should be accurate behaviour for the F4. Nice and stable in the approach configuration. Again, just you don't want to get any slower, which is exactly what I'm doing now. Otherwise the aircraft will bite you. So 4 whites on the PAPI, obviously a little bit high, we'll correct for that. And a little bit low there on our angle of attack. But that's as a result of putting in the nose down pitch input. I'd say we look fairly nose high here in terms of the approach. So on the centre line for runway 09. Just going to have to peek over the gun sight here. Again, it feels a little bit nose high. As you can see, really struggling actually to see over the nose of the aircraft for the landing. Anyway, on angle of attack, cutting the power. Again, just that little bit pitchy. There's touchdown, slight bounce there for the touchdown. And just keeping the nose up. Gently starting to come onto the brakes.
We'll just let you settle down here for a second. Up 2.
So not too bad of a landing. Again, slight bounce there. And as I say, the aircraft just felt a little bit nose high. Maybe just need a slightly higher seating position here as well, but a little bit tricky to see over the nose as we approach the runway.
Roger, 3 1/4 miles from touchdown. Heading 265 is good. We're on the glide path. Final check of gear, flaps and pressures free, landing acknowledge.
Yeah, pressure's good.
Okay, so we are now clear of the runway, making our way back in towards the flight line. Flaps can come up.
Disconnecting now. Good.
Now we'll take the landing lights off. Same for the strobes. Taxi light can go on. We'll get the canopy opened up here as well, just so we can hear the sounds of those spay engines for the shutdown. And we'll get ourselves parked up here once again, so we'll just come through into the parking area. We'll swing ourselves around, go and park up next to the Tornado there.
A little close, back 1. Go back. Good, up 2. Up 1, forward 2.
And as usual, we'll get ourselves shut down, run through the checks, and we'll finish up the flight here with a few thoughts regarding the DC Designs F4 Phantom.
Okay, good disconnect.
Onto the brakes, park brake can go on. For the aft landing and securing checks, the canopy is open, parking brake is set. Landing lights off, strobes are off, we'll leave the nav lights on for now. Generator switches, apparently both come off at this stage. The DC main selector can go through to safe. CODC is set through to normal. And for the engine masters, once again we'll just hide the number 2 throttle. Engine 1 master can go off. And it would actually make much more sense here again, just to have the DC selected on so that we can see the engine gauges. We'll leave that in standby for the time being. So good cut there on number 1. Do the same on number 2. And we have 2 good shutdowns. So both engine masters selected off. Once again, the DC selector can go through to safe. And that's the shutdown complete with our FGR2 back on the ground in Honington. So there you go guys, I do hope you enjoyed our outing in the DC Designs FGR2 Phantom. And hopefully as well there you enjoyed our mock intercept of the TU95. Once again, this video is intended to be more of a review flight, so just taking a look at the product as we go. As such, during the conclusion here, I'll just break things down into slightly more detail in terms of what's included with the package, and touch on a few features of the aircraft that we didn't look at in significant depth during the video. Firstly, in terms of what you get with the package, once again you get both the F4E and the F4J variants of the Phantom, as well as the FGR.2. Externally, I believe various visual differences between the different airframes have been modelled. Internally though, I believe the same cockpit is used for all three variants. You'll also get a different sound set for the FGR2 with its Rolls-Royce Spey engines versus the J79 engines of both the J and the E variants, which is a nice touch. With all three variants you get a very nice selection of repaints representing all sorts of military forces from around the world. The J variant of the aircraft is of course also carrier capable, although I've yet to test out that functionality for myself. And lastly, as you can see, there are also a few nice additional features. For example, we have external chocks and operable ladder. And I always think a really nice enhancement to any military product as well, we have visible external stores. The DC Designs Phantom can be equipped with the AIM-9 Sidewinder missile as well as the AIM-7 Sparrow. We also have the option for GBU-12s as well as I believe the Mark 83s fitted here. And finally of course as well we have the option to add or remove the 3 external drop tanks. It is worth noting that essentially all of the weapons here included with the aircraft are just a visual model, although there is a weight penalty associated there as well. As always, if the aircraft is purchased via the InSim marketplace, then no weapons will be available by default. Although I believe I'm correct in saying that DC Designs have actually uploaded a separate file over on flightsim.to, and that file will allow any PC users who have purchased the aircraft via the InSim marketplace to still have weapons displayed on the aircraft. DC Designs are actually the first developer, so far as I'm aware, to do that. I think that's a really great idea. Anyway, that just about wraps up what's actually included with the package. As usual, just to finish off the video, I'll give you my overall thoughts on the product, and we'll break that down into various sections. We'll start with the visuals, as that typically seems to be the biggest point of contention with DC Designs add-ons. As I mentioned during the flight, I think largely the aircraft is done to the same standards as a typical DC Designs add-on. Externally, whilst there certainly are more beautiful options out there in the sim, I think the Phantom looks pretty good overall. It does rather depend how you catch the aircraft with the lighting in the sim. Under certain lighting conditions the aircraft looks fairly photorealistic, but under other conditions not so much. I'm certainly not the best when it comes to counting rivets, so I'll leave it to you to decide how accurate the aircraft is actually modelled externally. Internally, again, fairly typical of a DC Designs aircraft. I think with the product you're really going to get more of a feel for the Phantom, a Phantom experience if you like, as opposed to a highly accurate recreation of the aircraft. So again, with the internals of the aircraft, I think it would be fair to say, looking at the cockpit, you know straight away you're looking at the cockpit of a Phantom, but there are certainly modelling inaccuracies, and the texturing as well, not the strongest by any means that we've seen in the sim. I do think most of the texturing is a little bit cleaner, a little bit more defined than we've seen on some of the previous DC Designs aircraft, so that's nice to see. In terms of the aircraft system's fidelity, again, far from study level, but DC Designs are pretty upfront about that fact. I'm not all that familiar with the Phantom in terms of the aircraft systems, so I can't give you an exact guide as to how accurate the add-on is versus the real-world jet. But even with that being said, it's pretty obvious that the system's fidelity is fairly lightweight. There's been quite a few concessions as well made in the cockpit. Of course, as well, no fault of DC Designs, but in terms of the aircraft as a weapons platform, that's pretty muted within Microsoft Flight Simulator. There are a few nice touches though in terms of the aircraft systems. Firstly, we have a somewhat working radar. Again, it is somewhat tricky to know exactly how to use that with the limited information available in the manual, but apparently you can actually pick up air-to-air targets with the radar, which is a nice feature. We also get a working INS, which is great, not something I think I've seen from any other product. Once more, I didn't have a whole lot to go off in terms of how to actually use the unit, but you can essentially plug in your lat and long coordinates. You can then select INS navigation on the HSI, and as you can see you'll get a reading in terms of distance to the target. In theory as well, I'm sure you should get a course to steer, but once more I couldn't figure that out on the aircraft at the time. Lastly as well, in terms of systems, it is nice that the rear cockpit is modelled at least to some degree, another nice touch overall. The sounds on the aircraft overall I think are generally pretty good. Really nice once again that we do get the 2 separate sound sets for the 2 engine variants. The engine sounds during the startup, generally pretty good internally, a little bit weaker externally I found. Otherwise though, I think the engines generally sounded pretty good throughout the flight, and the same as well for the extra cockpit sounds, for example the switches, the canopy, all seem to have quite nice additional sounds associated with them. With regards to the flight model, as stated, I don't know how accurate it is versus the real world aircraft, but overall I think DC Designs have done a pretty nice job there. Nothing seemed too out of whack, again perhaps with the exception there of the landing and the fairly high nose-up attitude. I did realise, watching the video back, some of that may be exacerbated by my landing technique. The Phantom, of course, essentially being a naval aircraft, is not really intended to be landed like a jet airliner, so greasing it onto the runway probably wasn't the order of the day. That being said though, we did need that high nose-up attitude, even to maintain a reasonable descent rate down towards the runway. So again, I would question the flight model slightly on that front. I was also a little bit surprised to see that we didn't get bitten more by the aircraft at low speed during the handling exercise. Other than that though, the aircraft generally felt pretty good during the takeoff. It was good fun to hand fly. The flight model felt very hands-on, representative of a jet of this era. And again, given that we're not looking at a full fidelity recreation of the Phantom here, that's not the product that DC Designs is trying to sell, I think that the flight model holds up more than well enough overall. In terms of the additional features included with the product, again there are some nice touches there. I like the fact that we get the 3 variants of the aircraft, the fact that we get multiple repaints as well, representing a number of different users of the F4, both past and present. Very nice to have the weapons visually modelled, and of course once again with the F4J you do also get that carrier capability. Lastly, in terms of the FPS, with the FGR2 I was getting around 45 frames per second, as opposed to around 58 with the default Cessna 152 under the same conditions. So the aircraft pretty decent in terms of any frame rate impact, certainly very manageable on most systems. To summarise my thoughts then on the DC Designs Phantom, as always it really comes down to what you're looking for in a product. If you want absolute accuracy, absolute fidelity, then DCS is probably a much better platform for you, and of course the Phantom arriving there fairly shortly as well. If however you're a big fan of the Phantom, looking for something a little bit more casual that you can just enjoy within Microsoft Flight Simulator, then overall I think this product ticks those boxes. As I mentioned during the introduction, I'm a huge fan of the Phantom myself, so I really enjoyed my outing here with the aircraft. Whilst the product is not up to the typical levels of fidelity that I would enjoy personally, for me at least that doesn't mean I can't still have some fun with it, and there are certain scenarios that you can only really run in Microsoft Flight Simulator. For example, I'm very much looking forward to taking the aircraft around the Mach Loop at a later date. If you are familiar with DC Designs products, perhaps you own a few of them yourselves and very much enjoy them, then I'm sure you'll enjoy the Phantom as well. Otherwise though, hopefully this video has given you some idea of what the product has to offer, and you can make your purchasing decision accordingly. Either way, I do hope you enjoyed the scenario. Once again, if you did, please consider giving the video a like. If you've yet to do so, then please consider subscribing to the channel as well. If you are really enjoying the content and you'd like to help support the channel, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron, and unlock some nice benefits along the way, including early access to a number of videos. And on that note, as always, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support. I do hope that all of you are having a great day, wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.